Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. My colleague and co-host Gordon Chang of Forbes.com is here with me. Gordon, we have a treat tonight, don't we? We're off to a very significant conversation about Tibet. I welcome Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sangay. Dr. Sangay is the head of government of the Tibetan Central Administration. Gordon, what does that mean, Tibetan Central Administration?
It's the government in exile, John.
Sikyong Sangay, a very good evening to you. Welcome to the United States, and I thank you for speaking to us. This is a pleasure. You were elected in 2011. We had an opportunity to talk to you right after your election. You've been in Dharamsala. You've traveled around the world. You're here in the United States meeting with leaders and talking with people about Tibet. I welcome you, and I begin immediately with bad news. I feel rude about doing this, Sikyong Sangay, but you know why. It's because of these self-immolations these last years. They're in the news much here in the United States. Why are Tibetans, young Tibetans, monks and nuns and others who are associated with Tibet, why are they destroying themselves in such a gruesome fashion? What makes them unhappy? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John and Gordon. Good to be on your show. Unfortunately, so far 117 Tibetans have committed self-immolation. Rather, they have set themselves on fire as a form of protest against the continuing occupation of Tibet and repression of the Tibetan people. Of the 117, nearly 100 have died. A majority of them are lay people, in the sense they're nomads, farmers and students and parents, and a significant number of them are monks and nuns. They are self-immolating mainly because the causes of political repression, economic marginalization of Tibetan people, cultural assimilation, environmental destruction. These are the main causes, and also there is no space for any form of protest. There is no freedom of speech for Tibetan people. If you protest, you get arrested, often tortured, and you, according to United Nations and Human Rights Organization, disappear and death. Given the consequences, many people are protesting in the most tragic form, and that is self-immolation.
Dr. Sangay, many Americans remember the self-immolations of Buddhist monks in Vietnam in the early 1960s, which shook not only the government in Saigon, but also the United States. What is the effect of these self-immolations on the Chinese government?
Yes, of the 117 self-immolators, it seems that the Chinese government do notice because during the 18-party Congress in and around Tiananmen Square and the leadership compound in Beijing, there were many fire service and fire extinguisher carried by the security personnel. So in that sense, they do know it's happening, and it could come to Beijing, and when in fact a Tibetan woman did committed self-immolation in Beijing. So they seem to know about it, and they should be concerned about it. Unfortunately, rather than realizing that the hardline policies in Tibet is not working and they ought to adopt more reform-oriented, more moderate policies, they are continuing the same. So more repression, thereby more resentment from Tibetans and more resistance. So this vicious cycle ought to end, and unfortunately, the Chinese government are continuing the same.
Yeah, it seems that the Chinese minority policies, as they call them, with regard to Tibet, with regard to East Turkestan or Xinjiang, and also with regard to other minorities around China, seem to be producing exactly the opposite results of what Beijing wants. And yet there is no change in those policies. That seems to me that there must be something very wrong in the Chinese capital right now when it comes to their policies with regard to their own people.
Unfortunately, Gordon, you're right. They know the hardline policies of the last 50 years has not worked, but then they are, prescribing the same medicine in a more harsher form, which will not work. For example, they have criminalized self-immolation, and they have prosecuted people associated with self-immolation and given them long prison sentences. For example, a Tibetan person who was trying to rescue the body of the self-immolator who was dead to give a decent funeral. Now he was slapped with a couple of years of imprisonment, and he's in jail. So, but then they ought to know that the very fact that there is self-immolation is both a desperate act on the part of Tibetan, but also a determined act on the part of Tibetan people to protest against the Chinese government policies.
Dr. Sangay, Hu Jintao, the previous leader of the Communist Party, was associated with brutality in Tibet. Earlier in his career, I believe he had been the Communist Party boss in Tibet, and that had led to sadism and other abuse of Tibetan people. But Xi Jinping is the new boss. Have you seen any change in the government with his takeover? It's early in his 10 years. Is he offering something new?
Nothing as of yet. Because if you look at the personnel level, more at a macro level, in the Politburo, which consists of slightly more than 20 people in the Communist Party, there used to be one quote-unquote minority of Hui ethnicity. Now, in the 18-party Congress, in the present system, there is no representation of a minority. In the Central Committee, for more than 200 or so people, there used to be 16 representation of minorities. Now it's been reduced to 10. So at personal level, even at the macro national level, the token representation seems to have been decreased. And as I shared with you, at the ground level, the self-immolation has been criminalized and prosecuted. So it doesn't look that encouraging, but then it's also too early to say. Xi Jinping is consolidating his position, and then by maybe early next year, we'll get some indication as to what are his real policies and priorities.
Gordon, I just ask a detail here. Would those reductions in numbers, it's surprising to me, would that be by accident or would that be on purpose as a signal to everyone?
I don't think that there are too many accidents when it comes to the selections of the members of the Politburo or the Central Committee. And the problem here is that, many people see that with the new leader, as you asked, there could be new policies. And people say that Xi Jinping, the current leader, his father had good relations with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and that Xi Jinping's wife is a Buddhist. But I think the problem is not the personal connections, but it's the nature of the Chinese communist system. And that system does not allow any sort of freedom, any sort of looseness at all with regard to the minorities. It really is just a question of constant repression, which is getting worse.
Yes, I agree. Xi Jinping and his father, Xi Tongshun, had a relationship or knew Dalai Lama when he went to Beijing in 1954. More so, the late Panchen Lama had close relationship with Xi Jinping's father, and thereby his father was introduced about Tibet. When late Panchen Lama passed away, he wrote the obituary, official obituary, a long one, which kind of reveals and kind of a very close relationship between the two. In that sense, in the family, there is familiarity with the issue of Tibet and to some extent Buddhism. Now, whether this will rub off on Xi Jinping and have some policy impact as far as Tibet is concerned, it's too early to say.
Dr. Sangay, you've been visiting in the United States, and I presume you've visited in Washington members of Congress. Have you been well received? Are you satisfied that Congress is well educated on the issues and on the crisis in Tibet?
Among the senators and the House representatives that I've met, most of them seems to be aware of what's going on in Tibet and are sympathetic and supportive of the issue. Obviously, there are few who need to be, educated more and create more awareness. But so far, I've met most of them are pretty well informed and are supportive of the issue, for which we are very, very grateful, both to the government and people of United States of America.
Dr. Lobsang Sangay, he is the Sikyong, the elected head of government of the Tibetan Central Administration, traveling in the United States. The Tibetan Central Administration is headquartered in Dharamsala in India. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.